Your reckoning is due.
Hello all, Revan619 here, and I am finally bringing you the Blade Dance build. I would do this later and I would finish my companion builds. Obviously the spreadsheet's all up to date, the examples of how to play them are all up to date, but not all the video breakdowns have been done. The reason I'm doing the Blade Dancer now is I've just reached max level. I'm in the final section of the game, and because I'm playing unfair Grimdark, once I win, I can't come back to my character. So, yeah, it's important that I show you now how it all works and go through it, because otherwise I won't be able to do it later. So I'm going to be running through what I've mostly used for Act 4 and going into Act 5 now. And then I will obviously, in the Ren Guide, give you some options and talk about what you can use in this point up to here. This melee Pyromancer I run quite differently from my warrior Pyromancer. As you notice, I'm still in light armor, and I have not, in fact, used the Psycho's Breastplate, because you really don't need to. I'm currently only Dogmatic 4, so my PR could be 9. It is much easier to actually get Dogmatic ranks now than it was previously. I'd managed to get Dogmatic 4 before the DLC in Act 5 previously, but I was not 440 Dogmatic. I'm quite a bit higher than that. So yeah, let's have a little look at what I'm using and talk about some things you can change. So obviously one of the most important items is the Eye of Jesuis. There are other items that you can put in the slot. I have put on the spreadsheet, but this really gets our PR up and helps set us up to get going. I've actually gone for the Psi Focus this time instead of a different necklace. So the wearer deals additional warp damage with their melee attacks. The damage is 5 times Psi rating, so the higher the Psi rating, the more that we do of it. Not as high as if you were using the Psycho's Breastplate, but it does help gain a little bit of extra damage. You could very easily actually trade this out because I am mostly using a dot build. So, yeah, depending on what you want to use, you could use the Star Mist Scarf, which would actually give you an extra 2 Psi rating, which would actually bring you up to 10, which means that you'd have more attacks in the first round from the Warp Surge Brooch, which is another important item I use. So in the first round of combat, the wearer gains a number of additional attacks equals to their Psi rating. So you could use this, and you could start off with 10 Psi rating, and that's very useful. Psi Focus, again, it's not that important because... yeah, but you start doing so much damage with this build, you probably won't even notice the difference. So if you want to use Star Mist Scarf to get those 2 extra attacks in the first round, absolutely fine. But you'll probably win before you even get through all those attacks, because of the way a couple of other things work, especially with this build going into Executioner. So another important item, Warp Surge Brooch. In the first round of combat, like I said, you get your Psi rating, number of attacks. Very useful, very powerful. Yeah, I do highly recommend having this to just be going in to do a lot of damage with it. It gives you the most attacks, so you can buff up and so you get in there. The armor piece I'm using is Shadow of the Undying One. This is a colony reward. What it does is when the wearer dodges or parries an enemy attack, they gain momentum equal to 3 plus the wearer's dogmatic rank. So because of our dogmatic rank, that means dodging and parrying actually increases our ability to get up to our heroic action. Now, the item on this that makes it incredibly OP is Voidborn's Pride, Voidborn's Pride that is. Whenever the wearer kills an enemy, their Medicae increases by 2 times resolve. So I've already got pretty high base resolve, but yeah, if you start stacking resolve, I'm using Words of the Emperor, then killing things, this goes exponentially up, increases your Medicae. By increasing your Medicae, you increase your health, and you also increase your critical damage. This can make you do incredibly juicy attacks, and because you can damage on your dots with your Executioner, very, very, very powerful. The gloves I'm currently using was Augmented Gloves, which gave me plus 10 weapon skill and 5 strength. It was very useful to crutch on that early on. You don't need it so much going into later games, so if there are other gloves that you want to swap to, then you can do. Heavy Lifters is another option, so if you want, you can just get a big old strength buff. You probably want at least 95 weapon skill, but you're probably going to get that from your initial buffs, so it kind of depends which you prefer to use there. I just like having the extra weapon skill because weapon skill ties into my Medicae, so it's basically self-perpetuating buffs. On this, I'm using the Malpain Shroud. Whenever the wearer deals damage with a melee attack, they gain temporary wounds equal to their toughness bonus +3 times icon class level. I'm only icon class 1 for this build. The reason that we do this is because our health is linked to our Medicae. When it stacks really, really high, we can then use the Executioner's ability to change our 30% of our health into temp wounds. So that's probably about 300 that you're going to see on this to do extra damage much later, because I've easily got my health over to 1,000 many times. So that's why we use the Malpain Shroud on that. If you don't have the Malpain Shroud, I very much recommend the Swashbuckler's Cloak. You won't be doing as insane damage, but it helps get your weapon skill up and it helps get your critical damage up. So it's very useful. It's a very good alternative. The sword that I'm currently using is the Dueling Sword. After scoring a critical hit with the Dueling Sword, the wielder has a weapon in the other hand. They immediately attack the closest enemy with it, using whichever attack costs the least AP. So you immediately attack with your offhand doing this. You get more dot procs on pit things, you degrade their armor quicker, you do a lot more damage. It's very useful. You can use it from death from above to get an extra hit. The secondary I'm using is the Noble Sword. Because it's bugged, it adds our willpower based damage to all damage. So that's an extra +20 at the start, but it can go up with our stats and stack higher. A good alternative to do this is, if you're not using a bug sword, is Watches from Above. It increases your dodge and your parry, but if there's something else you want to use, then feel free to swap to that, but make sure it's a sword so you can get your abilities. I don't go into Drukhari stuff because you get toxin from Biomancy, but that is an option you can go into to use poison. Secondary weapon I've got on at the moment, I don't really use, it's Cold-Blooded. It basically allows you to do additional attacks at the cost of wounds, but because of Warp Surge Approach, we don't really need this. If you ever went into round 2, you could probably use this, but you also lose a bit of weapon skill using it, but not really useful for me. I also throw on the Psychos Footwear. These boots gain the wearer +3% dodge until the end of combat for every psi rating. Basically, every time you use a psi power, you increase your dodge by 3%. Very useful early game. Late game, again, you're doing so much damage, you probably don't need them, so you could switch it to something else. Skirmisher boots aren't too bad to go into it. There's a few other options you can use, something like Dancing in the Blood, so you get a use of dash, so good alternative if you want some extra movement for later in the game. Yeah, so I highly recommend that one as well. So I've shown a lot of videos. There are a lot of videos up showing me how to use this build, but let's talk about what's actually under the hood of this build. Now, you might notice a slight change in music there, because I have actually managed to find a good spot to record going through the early, mid, and late game right before the final boss. One thing you will find in Act 5 is Inevitable Demise. Basically, your critical hits deal double damage, and it seems to apply to your dots as well. So, very good Act 5 gear, but you're not obviously going to get much out of it. But anyway, let's go on to the build. As always, this is optimized for how I like to play the game. I'm going to go through the early, mid, and then late games. The sort of gearing you're going to want to work towards, we'll sort of talk about it as we go through. So in the early game, we are a Blade Dancer. We start with the Death World origin, and we go into certain stats that I've put on the spreadsheet for you to see. The reason I go for these choices is to maximize what the Blade Dancer and then the Executioner can do. Starting at the first level, we get Blade Dance. Blade Dancer makes 2+ agility bonus divided by 4 melee attacks against random targets, including allies adjacent to the Blade Dancer, each dealing 50% of their normal damage. Blade Dancer is a melee burst attack that does not count towards the attack turn. The ability can only be used with a sword equipped. If 2 swords are equipped, the Blade Dancer makes 3 attacks with each one. That is also 1+ agility divided by 4, meaning you buff your agility, you get more out of it. The main skill is Medicae. Normally I give you options for what you want to go into. Medicae is required here, so you always want to go into it first. It ups your everything, damage, health, your dots. There's a lot that comes from this. Yeah, it's also very essential for removing injuries and traumas, which you will pick up a lot of, and we do play into that. We then get the best ability in the game for a DLC thing, which is Death from Above. Blade Dance slips into the air and lands on the selected target. Upon landing, they deal agility bonus plus weapon score bonus to all adjacent enemies. This leap can be made to any unoccupied cell within a 3-cell radius in the Blade Dancer's line of sight. This movement does not provoke attacks of opportunity. The Blade Dancer cannot jump to a cell that is inaccessible in combat. This ability can be used multiple times per turn, but each requires a charge to be spent. The Blade Dancer gains 1 charge of this ability each time they kill a target, excluding kills made from Death from Above. This ability can only be used with swords equipped. Very, very good. This helps us with blood movement. We then get Death Waltz. Blade Dance uses Death from above against a target enemy without spending a charge, immediately making a melee attack against that enemy. The Blade Dancer repeats this combination up to 4 times against random available targets. If it's impossible to use Death from above, the Blade Dancer only makes a melee attack against random enemy available target. It can be the same target, and it's very useful. We then go into Dance Partners. The reason we take Dance Partners first is as long as the Blade Dance has 2 swords equipped, the Blade Dancer's weapon skills increase by agility. This is very useful to get early on. We then go into Psycho Minoris. Each level of Psi rating provides the Psycho access to a new Psychic power. It's good to take it on the common levels, I find. We then do Agility first. Agility is very important, and it plays into everything this build does. Blood Oath. This ability costs a number of wounds equal to 5 plus Blade Dancer's level divided by 2 to use. Blade Dance targets a single enemy vowing to dispatch their mark. The Blade Dancer's next attacks against that selected enemy cannot be dodged or parried. Very good for assassins. If this attack kills the target, the Blade Dancer regains 13 wounds, which is 5 plus 2 times toughness bonus. Don't worry, Reveal the Light will buff that along with some other things. And regains 1 AP along with an additional attack this turn. This ability can be used multiple times per turn, but it only grants the 1 AP and additional attack once. We use this with another talent to actually get our movement so we don't get stuck after using a single attack or all of our leaps. More Medicaid, more agility. We then take Wounded Beast. So the reason we take this and we get fairly early is it's a Death World exclusive. Every injury increases the Death World character's agility and willpower by 5. Every trauma counts as 3. You will be picking up a lot of injuries and traumas because of your own uses of some of your abilities. So this is very good, and getting it early means you get a lot of mileage out of it. We then go into your choices for skills. I take Demolition because of your high agility, but if you need Athletics or something else, or even say Lord Warp, go into what your party needs, but Demolition is what I went for here. I then pick up Body of Flames. The Psychic gains 8 plus 8 times Psi rating additional armor against fire damage, and half the amount additional damage against energy damage from Las Melter and Plasma weapons. Very useful. We need that for this build. We then take Death Waltz. It's important to get Death Waltz upgrade 2 first. This is very good. We get 4 charges of Death from Above, and Death from Above also deals plus agility bonus and digital damage. Very good. We then take Death Warden. Very, very important little talent. The Blade Dancer's Medicaid is now determined by weapon skill instead of intelligence. If their weapon skill is higher, the Blade Dancer deals 5 plus Medicaid divided by 10% critical damage and can use medkits as if having the Medicaid skill. Yeah, this makes a lot of our build online. Weapon score increase. I then get Firestorm early. You can take Orchestrate Flames as well, but the reason I take Firestorm early is you're probably going to be leaping into something. You'll probably be getting a kill from Death from Above, and then you'll be able to then Firestorm with your additional attack. It's some good AoE damage. Just be careful not to place yourself too close to enemies that can hit you because they will get attacks of opportunity. You can use that with stuff like Fencer's Boots later to parry those and then get attacks back, but yeah, no, it's very, very useful ability. We then also take Blood Rush. Whenever the Blade Dancer uses an ability that costs wounds, they gain plus 3 MP on the current turn. This also applies to some of the execution abilities, such as Reckless Abandon. Yeah, this is very good. We then increase our weapon score more demolitions. We then take Relentless Blaze. When the Psycho is burning, the Psi rating is increased by 1, and the Psycho's resolve is increased by 2. Damage from fire no longer reduces Psycho's momentum. Very, very good to the build. I didn't take Carouse because it's kind of what I wanted on my character, but that's up to you. We get some willpower increases, which again will buff some of the Noble Sword damage as well as our Psycho abilities. We then have to take Psychum Juris here. Yeah, unfortunately, this is not a common talent, so it's annoying that the common talent's at 13 and the actual class talent's at 14. Every other class is the other way. But then we take Death Waltz 3. Until the end of combat, strikes made by the Blade Dancer, including the attacks made as part of Death Waltz, reduces enemy weapon skill and their armor and dodge. These penalties stack. Very, very useful. But that's going to be it for the early game. The armor and weapons you're going to be using is pretty much the best light armor you can find and the best swords you can find, and then any items that increase your damage, such as Book of Prayers or other things. Early on, you're going to be wanting to move from cover to cover, and you're going to be wanting to try not to leave yourself exposed at the end of your turn. Because we're not using the recall ability, Acrobatic Artistry, which we're using on Kibella, you can get left in the open, so be very mindful of your positioning. So now we're going to go on to the mid-game, and I apologise if you can hear little bells in the background. We've recently acquired kittens, and they are playing around me as I record this. So we go into Executioner. This DLC class, along with Blade Dancer, absolutely break the game, and you can do some amazing things with it. So we're going to talk about the key features you get. First of all is Scourging Strikes. The Executioner makes melee attacks and inflicts 2 times strength bonus levels of bleeding on all targets hit. Don't worry, we will update that as the build goes along. This effect is applied after all other effects from the attacks are applied. Yeah, this is very good to bleeding. And then we get one of the best abilities in the game. Whenever the Executioner inflicts damage over time effect on the target, which is already suffering from an effect of the same type, the target immediately suffers additional instance of damage from the initial effect. All damage over time effects of this type on the target, including the one just inflicted by the ones that will possibly be inflicted later, have their level increased by Medicaid divided by 15. In my case, it's 9, but this bonus stacks. Yeah, so this is currently bugged. If you are at Dogmatic 2, so you have the ability that when your ally is critical, or yourself, it sets enemies on fire in the first round. Forced Repentance is applied when your allies do it, because the fire damage that's stacking is coming from you, not your ally. So if you have Argenta or Ulfa of their improved heavy bolter doing like 30 round bursts, and they critical, it sets them on fire, then each critical builds up their flame stacks, and you get all your bonuses to these dots, and it builds up the damage. I've showed some videos of me using Ulfa and Argenta, and each shot of their burst flame, it's like it has Orchestrate Flame in it. It's doing 1,000 damage a bullet. So if so it starts off like 300, then like it goes up and up and up and up, and like I said, by the time you get to around the 20th shot, you're doing 1,000 extra damage per bullet. It's breaking the game. It might need to be looked at and balanced. The last one we get is Where It Hurts. This ability is amazing, and it's why we use Orchestrate Flame. So if the target of an Executioner's next successful attack is under any damage over time effects, this target will immediately suffer 3 instances of damage from each of those effects. 2 instances if the Executioner makes a burst or area attack. This damage is dealt after all other effects from all other damage applied, then all damage over time effects are removed from the target. This ability is applied instead of Scourging Strikes and removes all stacks of Forced Repentance. How we abuse this is with Orchestrate Flame. So in this one, the target does not stop burning and no longer makes tests to stop burning. Additionally, if the target is an ally, every melee attack, that ally inflicts full burning damage on targets of their attack, whilst they themselves only suffer half burn damage. So this means if you do 1,000 extra damage when you hit with your melee, when you hit with Forced Repentance, it will stack that, and it will proc that, and it will deal extra damage. But even better, when you use Where It Hurts, it will proc that damage from your burning dots. It counts as applying a dot 3 times. So if you do 1,000 extra damage, it will proc that 3 times. Very, very good. If you are not using this on your Pyromancer Executioner, you are using a bad build. There's no really room for movement there. If you're a melee Blade Dancer Executioner, you're not using Orchestrate Flame, you are missing all of the power of this build. The next thing we go into is Anatomy Expert. The maximum number of wounds for the Executioner depends on Medicaid instead of toughness. Good. We then go into Carnival of Misery. This is going to replace Blade Waltz as soon as we get to the first upgrade. Until the end of combat, all damage to enemies by damage over time effects is increased by 100% after all other modifiers. This effect stacks and can be inflicted by more than one Executioner. You can do some obscene things with this. We then get an AP increase. We increase our agility, because again, it's still very important to go up with agility. We then get more agility, and then we take Sparks of the Great Flame. The reason we take this one first is it does scale with our Psi rating, so it will do a lot. If you then combine it with the same from Executioner, they will stack together. So that 65% is actually coming from both of them. Yeah, no, it is very good. If you use them both. So we take Sparks of the Greater Flame first, so our dots can critical. We then take Inflame, which is absolutely a fantastic ability, and yeah, it will do some insane things. Until the end of combat, all burning effects will deal 2 times Psycho Ratings willpower bonus more damage. So obviously buffing your willpower is very important for Inflame. Every burning creature in combat immediately suffers damage, so it will start proccing things. We then go into Acute Pain. Whenever the enemy suffers damage from a damage over time inflicted by the Executioner the first time of combat, this damage is increased by 100%. yeah, that applies to a lot of things. We then take Medicae, again, very important, more weapon skill. We again get Psycho Terminus, because we need to up our Psi rating. We then take Invigorating Screams. Now, at first you think, well, whenever an enemy enforces our radius around the Executioner suffers damage from a damage over time effect, the Executioner gains plus toughness divided by 2 wounds. Now, +2 you might not seem much, but you are going to be buffing your toughness. So when you use Reveal the Light and Iron Arm, your toughness is increased, and this is per every dot. So when you're using Where It Hurts, it procs 3 times. You will get a lot. You will probably full heal most times that you use a Where It Hurts Firestorm. Very good. This helps make you immortal. More weapon skill, more Medicae, and then the most important part of this build, Carnival of Misery upgrade 3. All enemies in combat immediately suffer bleeding, burning, and toxing. The levels of this effect is equal to the character's level divided by 10. This preloads a bunch of buffs, so this means that you don't need to keep doing lots of little hits to build up stacks of enemies before you use Where It Hurts. They're preloaded, and if you have a strong enough Orchestrate Flame, your first hit with Where It Hurts will do a lot of damage. I think the highest I've seen in a single one that I've done is 12k. 10k without going too crazy, but there are ways that you can enhance it, especially with the Malpain Shroud and some other little things. Very, very good. We then take Master of Torture. The Executioner deals 5% more damage to a target of each type of damage over time inflicted on the target. We're going to be going into Biomancy soon, so we'll have all 3. We then take some Willpower, because we need Willpower now. It's very, very good. We then take Demolitions, but then the ability we go into is Biomancy. This will give us Iron Arm, which gives buffs equal to our Psi rating. Very good. Increases our strength, increases our toughness, but more importantly, it allows us to get biophysical distortion. All of the Psyker's powers now poison enemies. This poison deals 3 + 3 times Psi rating toxic damage at the start of each enemy turns. Now, if you don't go into this, you do want Drukhari weapon proficiency, so you can use their Toxin Daggers, because some of them do AoE hits. I use that in Kabila. Very, 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 very powerful. If you don't go into it and you're using Executioner Kabila, you are, again, losing most of the build's damage and most of the build's potential. She pairs very well with a Rogue Trader Executioner, because now she can also inflict burning because of him. So you can get all 3 stacks on Kabila just by having your Rogue Trader be dogmatic too. We then take All-Encompassing Agony. If the Executioner suffering from any of the Executioner's demo over time effects is suffering from burning, bleeding, and toxin, all of these dots do 30% more damage to that enemy. Yeah, good, good, good. More willpower, more good, more strong, more win, more demolitions, and then we take fire with him. This is very, 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 very important to the build. Every time the Psyker kills or scores a critical hit against 8 creatures in one combat, the Psyker's next attack, including attacking from Psychic powers, will cost 0 AP and will not count towards the attack limit per turn. I run out of movement and enemies before I run out of AP because of this. This applies to all of our crit procs, all of our kills. Overpowered. It needs to be rebalanced. Oh my god. We then take more willpower. Psycho Extremist, because we need to get our Psi rating up. Pretty good. And then finally we take the last Carnival of Misery upgrade, which can make our allies some absolute monsters as well. Till the end of combat, all Executioner's allies are healed by damage over time effects instead of suffering damage. The number of wounds restored is equal to the amount of damage that would be dealt by the effect of after all other modifiers applied. Yeah, if you take stuff like Confer Immunity, and you've set your allies on fire with Ignite, and then if you Orchestrate Flame, so they also get the melee damage. I've done stacks on Inflame of up to 2500, and you can turn that into temporary wounds. If they have a Chainsaw and Malpain Shroud, everything is dying. But that will conclude the mid-game. So, now we move into the end game, which is when we go into our Exemplar, and there are some fun little tricks that we can do here. So, first of all, we take critical velocity. So what this does, and it applies to a lot of things as we are doing it, is critical velocity. The character's critical hit chance and critical damage are increased by 5% of their dodge. Pretty useful. The higher your dodge, because you can buff that up, the more chance you have to crit, the more damage you do. It applies to everything. We then take Promises of Blood. What this does is Blood Oath restores an extra 1 AP. You could possibly replace this. Like I said, I very rarely run out of AP. More Medicae, very important to get Medicae up. We then take Fragile Playthings. What this does is the first instance of damage dealt by the Executioner's damage over time Yeah, overtime effects. This round reduces the inflicted enemy's armor by 14% until the end of combat. That's actually 10 plus intelligence bonus, so that will get a little bit buffed by voice of command. This effect can be inflicted on multiple enemies per round, but only once per enemy, and it also stacks. More agility, more good, more win. We then take Melting Armor. Every time an enemy suffers damage from the Psyker, that enemy's armor is reduced by 5%. If the enemy's armor is already 0, their deflection is reduced by 1. Apparently around 20 or 30% of this is when it starts reducing it, but because you do so many sources of damage, yeah, you'll hit that cap very quickly if it's there. We then take Molten Beam. This deals double damage of our Ignite. It can ignore armor. It can set enemies on fire if it reduces their armor, because it reduces it by -30, which is 10 plus 2 times psi rating. Yeah, very, very good. It's also a good range. If you get trapped with a ton of AP and you can't quite reach them, you just start firing off sunbeams and you finished around that way, especially if you want to use Twin Flame. It's very good. More Medicae, as always. Then we take Peak Condition. This is what gives us all the strength, so we do tons of extra damage. The character gains bonus to their strength equal to 20% of their maximum wounds. We stack wounds from Medicae. We stack wounds from Dodge. We stack wounds because we keep stacking. We are a god. Yeah, no, it's good. It gives us crap ton of strength. We then take Backdraft. So whenever Psychic Power used by Psychic deals damage around an enemy within 2 cells of the initial target suffers half this damage. That damage does not trigger this talent again. Yeah, more damage, more dots, more win. Good. We then take Increase to our Agility. We then get Rising Tempo. Normally, I took this early in my first run, but then I found that I started taking it a little bit later, which is why I'm taking it now, because you just get more out of it the more attacks that you end up doing. But yeah, so what this one does, each attack made by the Blade Dancer increases damage of all attacks they make this turn by 5%. This can stack up 15%. Area attacks, burst attacks, including Blade Dance, and other attacks that deal multiple hits are considered single attacks. So as long as you do more attacks, yeah, it builds up. It's pretty good. We then take Reckless Abandon. Yeah, no, this is huge. This ability, game changer. The Executioner replaces 80 of their wounds, which is 30% of the maximum health, with the same number of temporary wounds. The Executioner, when they have temporary wounds, all of their melee attacks and damage over time effects deal an additional 80% damage. Because of the way we can stack Medicae, I've had over 1,000 health, so that's actually, yeah, that's been 300% extra damage. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. That also procs our Death World abilities. More weapon skill. We then start taking Deep Laceration. When Scourging strikes, the Executioner's melee hits inflict 30 levels of bleed instead of 20. Very, very nice. Strange Vitality. So this helps our allies as well as ourselves. When the Psyker's allies or the Psyker themselves are under the effects of Psychic powers, they get 5 toughness for each of such effects. This will also boost our self-healing. It's pretty good. Demolition, Revenge. So this is one of those little secrets that I was talking about. When the character loses wound, their next melee attack gains +1 damage for every 2 wounds the character has lost. Stacks. We convert 300 health to 300 temp health. Our next attack does 150 extra base damage. How about that? More AP. We then take Race Against Death. The Blade Dancer's maximum wounds are increased by the Blade Dancer's dodge, divided by 10. More health, more stuff, more win. Demolitions. We then take Blade in his hands. Again, I used to like to take this early, but now we start taking it later. What a Blade in his hands does is any Blade Dancer attacks made with a sword deal additional agility bonus % additional damage. This bonus damage is doubled if using a two-handed sword. Yeah, so it starts getting our melee attacks up. We then, because we're using dots, we don't really need it early on. We then take Racking Weakness. What this does is the damage dealt by the Executioner's damage over time effects is increased by Medicae divided by 20% for every 10% penalty to armor suffered by that type from that source. So as we start stacking our Medicae, this starts doing a hell of a lot more damage. This is how you get some of those insane dots that I was showing off earlier. We then take more weapon score, more willpower, go into Carouse, and then we take Extermination. Any damage that the character deals is increased by +1 for every attack they have made this combat. Does not affect damage over time effects. Now, some people like to take Cataclysm, but if you actually read Cataclysm, all damage dealt by the character increased by 3% till the end of combat for every new enemy damaged by them. Now, Cataclysm can be massively procced by Inflame, so you can choose to do this. You Carnival of Misery, and then you Inflame. You get the Cataclysm of everyone on the battlefield. The only problem is, I find that everything's sort of dead by then, so what you can choose is, if you want Extermination, or if you want Cataclysm, pick which you want. Cataclysm is very useful, because of Carnival of Misery. It will allow you to basically get the maximum out of this straight away. So honestly, if you're going to be going into Carnival of Misery, I would recommend getting Cataclysm here. Next, we go for Does It Hurt? All damage over time effects inflicted by the Executioner gains 65% additional chance. So by taking the both, it stacks higher, so you're guaranteed those crits now. We then get more Karus. We then take Facing the End. So what Facing the End does is the Blade Dance gains 3 weapon skill and 3 agility for every injury they are currently suffering, with plus 10 for weapon skill and agility for every trauma. So it's a nice boost to our weapon skill and agility that we get by just recurring wounds. It's not as good as Wounded Beast, which is why I take that earlier instead. We then take It Will Not Die just to get our wounds up, because that gives us some little bonuses. You could even take Nimble if you wanted more dodge, but I found I just don't need the extra dodge from it, especially this late in the game. I would then take Gift of Torment. Until the start of their next turn, the Executioner gains bonuses parameters for each creature or enemy in combat that are suffering from the following effects. Bleeding, Burning, and Toxin. We get extra dodge, armor, and deflection. It is based on our tough bonus, so if we buff them, we get more of that, and it will count for every enemy on the battlefield. More willpower, combat meditation, and then we get Balancing on the Edge. Now, this is something that can be very good early on, but on my Psyker build, I just didn't have any room for it early on, which is the Blade Dance can use both Desperate Measure and Heroic Act in the same combat, but not in the same round. Whenever the Blade Dance uses Desperate Measure, they gain 10 weapon skill and 3 resolve. We also get the bonuses because of the Blade Dancer's Death Waltz ability, gives a random trauma, so you'll get lots of procs for Wounded Beast and Facing the End because of that. Then we get more AP increase, and that's it. We've covered the build. And obviously, like I said, you really want to go into Dogmatic. It's good to get Iconoclast 1 because, it can give you those temporary health at the start. And like I said, with those little bits of changes to gear that you can get early on, Inevitable Demise deals double damage, which is pretty good. But if not, stick to the other things. But this is probably in current patch the strongest build that there is, and just by having it, your aim boosts all the damage of all your other companions as they're doing crits as well. But yeah, very important. Voidborn's Pride. This thing's busted. Like I said, as you build up momentum, that just goes through the roof, especially if you're then getting the officer abilities. Trivialize the game, one-shot everything. Check my videos. You can see me one-shotting every boss in the game on Grimdark Unfair. I've done it. I finished the run. Good times. Anyway, see you all.